All right, and so that raises a different set of questions. But then I thought, okay, so it's not because we're not sending enough Latinos to college. Let's look at who's enrolled in college, right? And so these are actual raw numbers that you see on this graph. And so you see that in 2016, we had a total of 16.9 million people enrolled in college, right? So about 17 million people going to college at the same time, 2-year or 4-year. And you see that in 2016, whites, they made up 9.1 million out of the 17 million. So 9 out of 17 people were white. But you see Hispanics, nothing to sneeze at. I mean, in the year 2000, we were below 2 million enrolled. It was actually 1.4. And now, as you look at 2016, 3.2 million Hispanics or Latinx enrolled in college. So, that's 9-3. That's 1/3, right? In comparison to whites, and more than blacks and more than Asians, right? So if you take a look at the little chart, the table at the bottom left of your screen, so you see those are the representations. Those are in millions. And we talk about equal representation, right? Equally distributed representation. So let's take a look at that. If you take the 9 million white students and compare them to the general population of white people, so that's 211 million, they make up 65% of the US population. When you take the 9% out of the 17 million that are in college, they're only making up 53% or 54% of the total college enrolled population. And so if you were talking about equal representation, then you see that they're actually underrepresented by 11%. If everything was the same, then there should be 65% enrolled in colleges as well, and there isn't, right? And so Latinos, you take a look at their level of representation in the population and compare it to their level of representation in the universities, and they're actually slightly overrepresented at 18.9%. I didn't know this data. This was unheard of for me. I mean, when I was in high school and I was in college, we would always talk about, the achievement gap. Obviously, there's still an achievement gap if you start looking at grades and what they're studying, I suppose. But in terms of numbers, mission accomplished. All that fight for what were they calling it? Affirmative action. I mean, you can split those numbers and find some other discrepancies, but hey, if you look at this in general population terms, blacks are the same, 13 and 13, and Asians almost the same too. Almost seems by design, doesn't it? I mean, that you have that, but that's what it is. And so it's not because they're not in college, so they're graduating on time. They're, where Latinos are graduating on time, they're, going to college right away, and they have, fair representation at the university level. And so that's not the cause. But now let's look at how things look